Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. For 26 years, Margaret Cheng taught elementary education in the Iowa City School District. Mrs. Cheng has been a part of many changes in the education field: the computer revolution, a rise in minorities in the district, the advent of all-day kindergarten, to name a few. Margaret Cheng was born in Nanking, China in 1933. After the communist takeover, she and her family moved to Taiwan. She studied and graduated from Taiwan University and later received a master's in guidance counseling in the education department at the University of Wisconsin. How she got from Taiwan to Madison, Wisconsin, about 40 years ago, is quite a story. She married Frank Cheng, a biochemist, and eventually they, with their 3 daughters, moved to Iowa City in the Coralville region in 1964. Teaching has always been central to her life. She helped start the Coral Daycare Center in Coralville. In 1967, Margaret founded the Chinese school at the downtown Congregational Church, and it's still going. She taught Sunday school. She became a kindergarten teacher and taught at Lincoln School in Iowa City for 8 years, and then moved to Kirkwood Elementary and taught there for 18 years. Margaret has contributed her time to the Chinese Cultural Program, the Coralville and the Iowa City Public Libraries, and is active helping Chinese students. For her outstanding teaching, Margaret Cheng received the Golden Apple Award. She and her husband Frank have 3 daughters, Pearl, Tina, and Teresa, and 5 grandchildren. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you, Ellen.
Margaret, I know your story begins, like I said, in Nanking, China, 1933. Tell me a bit about your first family and your parents and what they did and if they traveled and...
Okay. My real name is King Jane, means the pearl of the capital. And Nanking was the capital then. That's why I was named the pearl of the capital. And I came from a pretty kind of adventurous parents. My father, when I was born, I was the youngest one in the family.
8 children?
8 children, right, but 2 passed away before I was born. So I was the only one born in the hospital because my mother was about 41 years old. Mm-hmm. And so I was really the pearl of the family then, too. But good thing I had a nephew who was just about 7 months younger than I am. So the reason I wasn't really spoiled because, well, I have to be an aunt. Mm-hmm. So whatever I do, my mother will remind me, remember you are an aunt, you better behave like an aunt. So that prevented me from being spoiled, I guess.
Now tell me, you said your parents were adventuresome. Tell me about this. I know I read your grandmother did not want your mother
My grandfather didn't want my mother to go to school at that time. You know, my mother, if she be living, she be over 100 years old. So that was about 100 years ago. And girls, they didn't go to school much at all. My mother wanted to go just like all the boys, but grandfather wouldn't let it. So sometime when my grandfather was out of town or something, didn't know, and she would sneak out to the school. And then sometime when she comes back, if my grandfather already home, and some people, servants, would just put up 3 fingers, means the third master is home. Then she had to hide her, school bags, and then went back without it.
But she did go to Japan and studied later on, did she not?
Right. That's when my father helped some in certain, certain ways to help for the Chinese Revolution, 1911. And so after the revolution was successful and Republic of China was established, so the government asked him, you want to have some kind of a government job, or do you want to go abroad and study? So my father chose to come to United States to study. So he came to the University of Pittsburgh, studied mining. And at that time, after my father left, during that time, actually, my mother was pregnant when my father came here.
She came with him? Did she?
No, she had to have this child, my second oldest brother. So after she had my second oldest brother, then she left my first brother and second brother with her mother, with my grandmother. Then she went to Japan to study in music and art and craft. Then when my father, after a couple years, my father came back home, and then she came back with my father.
And now you're still in China at this time. You haven't moved to Taiwan yet.
Right, that time, right. So actually, my second brother's name has America in it. 美国, that means America, because my father was in America when he was born. Right.
So you went through equivalent to our grade school, junior high, and high school in China?
Right. I went to elementary school and junior high in Xi'an, that's interior China, my so-called my native place. And then after that, went to Nanking for about a year or so, then went to Taiwan. Then I finished my high school and college year in Taiwan.
Did your parents encourage you to go on to the university?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Of you
Education is the main emphasis for any children. And so they support you to go as far as you can go, as far as you want to go.
And no matter if you're a boy or a girl?
Right now, yes. When I was in my teenage years and high school years, yeah.
Was your father strict?
My father actually is not as strict as my mother. My father was the one, especially with me, because I'm the youngest one, and he just loved me to pieces. And I still remember when I was in high school, and he would say, okay, the same old place, meet me. So Saturday, after school, we went to school on Saturdays too. And so I would go to a park which is across the street from the high school. And there was a fountain, so I always waited for him there. And then he would pick me up, and then would go watch a movie, go out to eat, or do something together. Oh. So it's a wonderful memory then too.
I'm sure it must have been so painful when you made the decision to come to study in the United States, and
That's
he
right.
had to put you on that ship.
Yes.
You didn't fly here, did you?
No, I didn't.
There were no international flights?
No, there weren't any scheduled flights. They were chartered ones, but then you would never know when there's going to be a chartered one, whether there's enough people to have a chartered plane. So I had to, well, that time my mother, was the main force that helping me to come out.
So, she said, go study abroad.
She is the one, more or less, push me on. And then I didn't have any way to come, after I get the admission here in Wisconsin. So she found out that in Hong Kong, there's some precedent line to come to United States. So we bought ticket there, but then you have to, I did fly to Hong Kong. And then I didn't know anybody in Hong Kong. Now, what I'm going to do in Hong Kong?
And you're what, about 18 years old?
Oh, no, that's about 22.
22, because you had taught, had you not?
23, right.
You had taught a year in a junior high.
Exactly. I taught 1 year junior high in China, in Taiwan, before I came abroad.
Okay.
And so I went to Hong Kong, but nobody I knew, and then I had to stay a couple of days before the president line left. So my mother knew a friend that she was acquainted with a long time ago. So she wrote to her and send a picture of me. So after I get to the airport, this lady, sure enough, came over with this picture, looking for this person.
And
that's right. So I stayed over in her house for a couple of days before I
boarded
the ship and came over.
And then you landed in San Francisco, and was there somebody to meet you there?
Well, I didn't have anybody, but my mother and my sister somehow arranged somebody. But I didn't know that because all that time I was on the ship. So there's again a gentleman came with my picture and looking for me, but I didn't know him. So I was scared to go with him. And in the meantime, I knew a schoolmate there, but not too well, but I knew her. She was, over there meeting a Catholic father there, priest. And so I said, I better go with you. It was the Catholic priest, more reliable than anybody else. So they went to, this priest said, well, I arranged for you to stay in YWCA. But I don't know whether there's another place for your friend. So he called. They didn't have any more. So I said, what to do? So I had to call a nurse whom I got acquainted to on the ship because I was sick on the ship. So I called her. She said, okay, you can come stay with me. So my friend didn't want to stay by herself either. So she and I both stayed with the nurse for a couple of days before we came over.
Now, Margaret, did you come over with the name Margaret? Did you come over with that Americanized
Yes, I
name?
came with King Jane and also Margaret. Yeah, but Margaret is the name I got when I was in high school, when I was in Taiwan. We had an English teacher, and she's from Britain. And each class at that time, about 50, 60 students. And when she looked at all the Chinese names of 50 or 60, she said, there's no way I can, even match you with the name, let alone I pronounce it. So she said, I got a list of names. Everybody come up here, choose one from here. So from then on, you can go with that name. So that's how I chose Margareth. I don't know, must be a British name.
I guess so. So we're now at University of Wisconsin. You don't know anyone. You're having a little trouble with a language, slang.
Right.
What did you work outside of your classes?
Oh yeah, I worked many jobs. Because when we came over here, we really didn't have much money. We only have like $2,400 saved in the bank. Everybody has to have that in order to come here. And so that won't last very long, the room and board and everything, tuition. So you have to find some job. So I worked in a German restaurant. And because the culture is so different, I had no idea the people order what they order and what kind of drink they're talking about. So then they said, well, you have to be a busgirl. You cannot be a waitress. So I was the busgirl, but I was just deadly tired, work, until midnight, then take the bus to come home to the dorm. That just didn't work. So I worked about barely 1 week, I quit. That just wouldn't work. Then I worked in a Chinese restaurant to be a hostess, which was fine, lead the way, seating all the customers. But then one day, somebody told me, the owner told him to ask me that, oh, you got to put on nylons. You got to wear something more fancy. I was very offended. I thought, didn't I do my job right? Why should I have to dress up like a butterfly to welcome me? You see, that's a different cultural background. So I quit. I just didn't want to do that. I thought I was insulted. Then I worked with the university, and I worked with the horticulture, in the horticulture department. And first I was burning tobaccos.
Tobacco leaves?
Leaves. And that's one kind of test you do. You burn the leaf, take the long leaf, you burn the tip, you burn the middle, you burn the end of it, and see how long you count. 1, 2, you go with that kind of what do you call the piano when you play
metronome.
piano? Yeah, you count with that. And then you record it. And didn't know at that time, of course, when you are smoking and smell all that smoke, it's really bad for your health. Good thing I didn't work there too long. And
was this about the time you met your husband-to-be, Frank?
yeah, I already knew him then, but we weren't very close yet. So, but I knew him, and because I knew him ever since, ever since I got there, soon after I got there. Because when I was making transfer, the railroad and from Chicago to Wisconsin, I met Miss Studley, who was very enthusiastic in Chinese organization and Chinese Midwest rally, so-called, and this kind of get-together. And she just came back from the rally site, and at the train station, she met me. And so she wrote down all the information and everything. And when Frank came over to Wisconsin, and he knew her long ago, so he went over to visit her. So said, hey, you're going to Wisconsin. I got this girl who was just going there.
So she was kind of the matchmaker, a little matchmaker.
Yeah, so told him about me.
And he looked you up, and pretty soon you were married in Madison.
Yeah, well, after I graduated.
After you graduated.
Yes.
And then you came to Iowa City. You were married, and did you have a child by the time you came to Iowa City?
We went to Toledo because Frank went over there to work. So we stayed in Toledo about 5 years, and all 3 girls were born there.
In Toledo?
In Toledo, Ohio. Yeah. So when we came over here, 1964, and our youngest one was just 2 months old. It was cold.
Yes, it is cold in Iowa City in December and January. Now tell me, you immediately kind of got involved in a daycare center and helped form this
Not
nursery?
immediately, because I was busy with 3 kids, and the youngest one was only 2 months. So I waited until Teresa's about 3. Then I talked with a neighbor who has a little girl, and they used to play together with my Teresa. And her name is Esther Drew. So she and we thought, why don't we start a nursery school? Because that time in Coralville, there wasn't any. So we thought, well, why don't we go to our church? So we talked to the church board, and they thought it was a wonderful idea, so they sponsored it. And then we started the whole thing and did all the arrangement and the organizing.
And it's still functioning?
It's still going. We started out as a choral nursery school. Now, after several years, the board changed to daycare for the whole day.
Now, as I said in my introduction, you taught at Lincoln for 8 years kindergarten and then 18 years at Kirkwood. What do you view your greatest strengths as a teacher for that young age of 5-year-olds?
I love children. That's one thing. And my thing is I love to make learning games, fun games. So make the children learn without knowing that they are learning. Make it more fun. That's what I like, and that's what I miss now after I retired.
You just retired last spring. And,
that's right.
I know you're not retired because you're doing a lot of other things, but we'll get to that. So what was the hardest thing for you as a teacher?
Hardest thing, of course, I have to mind my language and all the pronunciation and everything I have to model for the kids. So I have to be more careful.
Were they curious about you being Chinese? Did children
I
at that
think
age?
they are, but they're not too much. They're not much at all. At the very beginning, I'm sure they were, but then later, people already know there's a Mrs. Cheng in the school. They talk to the kids, so they really didn't feel anything. And the children, you know, from other country in the same class, they don't really feel much different.
What did you want them to know about the Chinese culture? I'm sure you told them, you know, about your background. And
yes,
what did you want them to how did you teach them about China and being Chinese?
Yeah, I always taught them, you know, we look different, but we are in many ways we're the same. Then I did teach them that sometimes people look a little bit different, they think a little different because they're cultural. molded them differently. So I usually introduce some of the Chinese culture to them, and the books and the things.
Food?
Oh, the food, sure, that's one thing.
Did you make some things in the walk? And
always do something, some cooking and some things with them, use chopsticks. They love it. They just love it. And then I always like to teach them. I said, well, now you are always facing TV, sitting there watching TV. But that time, when I was little, there wasn't any TV. So we did a lot of things, telling stories with strings, telling stories with just paper, with finger hands, you know. And so I show them that. They are very fascinated with those kind of things.
Looking back of the 26 years you taught in the school district, what has meant the changes that have meant the most to you, or that you've been the most amazed about, or and the changes in elementary education?
Well, I think computer is the biggest thing. Computer changes. Even in kindergarten right now, there's a computer, and they do use computer, and they love it.
Kindergarten, the children have computers.
Yes, and we always have a computer program to show the parents too. I always like to put the children in the computer, you know, put on some kind of program for parents to see, and this is another way to motivate them to learn. Yeah.
I read an article that you believe in the Chinese proverb that you learn as you teach. Has that been so true for you over the years?
That's right. Even though when I teach kindergarten, what do you learn? But you learn a lot from the kids. You learn a lot from the peers. There's always a lot of things you learn.
Now, you took a break from the elementary education and you went to China, back to China, and taught some young students how to speak English. Tell me about this 4 months over there.
Yeah, I took a semester leave of absence and went to China. Mainly my brother, I have a brother in Luoyang, which is more central and interior China. And I hadn't seen him for 40 years about. And he's got a family, got a wife, you know. And after, 1980 or so, we started to have communication. So he was mentioning, well, they do need English teacher. You interested or not? I said I would be. So he arranged for me to go over there. And it was teaching a class of during about January, no, it's October, November, December, and January. They had several classes for the people, for actually college graduates, to come over to have some English training, because they have the prospect to come to United States to study in the area of agriculture or to work in agriculture area. So I went over there to teach them English conversation.
And what I liked, what you had them do at the end of your 4 months, you made this booklet and you had them write in English about having you as a teacher.
Yeah.
And their pictures so you won't forget them.
That's right.
And now many of them are over here studying.
Many of them study. Some of them probably already went back. And some I know some of them went back and then come out to work. You know, some in Canada, some in this country. Now,
I want to ask you about your community involvements. We talked about the nursery school, and you started the Chinese school that's now in the Congregational Church, and it's still functioning also. And you also help foreign-born parents with some of the complexities of living in this culture.
Right, especially in the years that Hakkai Court residents, all their children came over to Kirkwood. That's where I was teaching. So I helped them quite a bit. And the parents, they don't really know the structure of the school. It's somewhat different from back home. Like back home, they have recess, everybody the same time. Like over here, you rotate. They just don't understand why, even indoor recess, why you have to be quiet, you know. Just certain things. I try to go to their place and explain to them. Or sometimes they want to know, for example, like English as second language and all this kind of thing they don't know.
Do our schools have more rules than Chinese schools?
We did. I worked with some English as second language teachers. We made a booklet and for the foreign parents to understand more or less of the structure and organization in the school, what special classes we have, and this kind of thing, for them better understand, you know.
Well, Margaret, a major part of your story, I know you're a mother of 3 daughters.
Right.
Pearl Lee, Tina Lee,
Right.
and Teresa Lee. They all have the same middle name.
That's a Chinese custom. You know, if you're brothers, sisters, there's one name the same. Like my name's King Jan, my sister's name's Hua Jan. There's Jan the same. Right.
And tell me where they are, what they're doing.
Okay, Pearl is located in Bay Area. She works for NASA for many, many years, and she is the deputy chief of a division there. So, and she works very hard on the space project, and also she's very active on the kind of Asian American organization, diversity. You know, she came back actually not too long ago, talk here too on diversity. Yeah, and that's Pearl. She has 2 children, and Tina, our second one, is a pediatrician. So she's working at the Washington, D.C. area. It's for D.C. Children's Hospital. And she especially interested in helping all the unwed teenage mothers. So she started a special kind of clinic for teenage mothers in the hospital. And she helps out and try to help them how to care for the children, how not to get any more children if you don't want, and things like that. She has 2 children herself. And the youngest one, Teresa, she graduated from Brown University with an electrical engineering degree. She worked in a computer company, but she recently just had a baby, so she's not working right now. She'll wait for a while, take maybe a year or so, then go back to work.
You and Frank must be very, very proud of these 3 daughters of
Yes,
yours.
we are.
Now, we want to talk a little bit, now that you're retired, you had a wonderful retirement parties, and the children, you know, made banners, and the teachers took you out. That was so, and I know you missed some of the teaching.
Oh, yes,
and
I
the
sure
kids,
appreciate. They are wonderful, you know, peers to work together. I really miss them.
But you work with your hands, and you have all these hobbies. Tell me a little bit about that, and then I want you to mention briefly your relationship with this Jiao Jiao, who you had for 17 years, that meant a lot to you, too.
Yeah. First of all, though, after I retire, I still want to work on 2 goals. One is to help promote the Chinese cultural understanding for people in this country. Another thing is to help children. So I still volunteer. I go back to volunteer to read to them, to help them write, and this sort of thing. And then the other times I do a lot of hobbies, which are, you know, like crocheting and knitting and computer work.
Computer work, and you're making these wonderful books.
I make little books for my grandchildren.
On the computer with
Right.
pictures in them.
With, you know, some kind of directional concept with high-frequency words, since that's my field.
You're still teaching, Margaret.
So I'm making those books for my grandchildren.
And now tell me about this wonderful pet you had for 17 years.
Yes. Her name is Jiao Jiao. Jiao Jiao in Chinese, it's a Chinese name actually. Jiao Jiao means cute and lovable, you know. And she is a poodle. She's a mix of toy and a miniature poodle. And black and gray and white, you know. And
But you taught her a lot.
She was the smartest thing. I taught her many things, and she learned very quickly.
Play the piano?
Yes, play the piano, push the ball. She knows the difference of a ball and a sake and pillow and all that. She can play hide and go seek, and she can play jump over the yardsticks and ring the bell or anything. So for the last, I don't know, maybe 8 years, even longer. I brought my kindergarten students to my house. One thing to show them the Chinese articles and talk about Chinese culture. Another thing is to watch Jojo to do all the tricks.
Oh, they love that.
Yeah. Then we go back and they would make a book. It's I always name Jojo's Tricks. I have collected so many of them, and they are just so adorable. They're, you know, children's drawing and with Jojo.
That's wonderful. My last question is, what's the best thing about living in Iowa City and Coralville for you?
Yeah, now Iowa City, Coralville is just like my native place. I've been here longest than any other place. And I think Iowa City, Coralville, it's a wonderful place to raise a family. And it's so, you know, friendly and, you know, in a way it's a little bit sheltered, but it's just like a bigger family, and the children, they were accepted so well, and they grow up and they treasure this place, and you know, they're friends, and the place they still like to come back quite a lot.
Good.
So I think this is a wonderful family, bringing up families town.
Well, thank you for being my guest on One of a Kind.
Well, thank you.
This was wonderful, Margaret. My guest on One of a Kind has been Margareth Cheng. For 26 years, she taught kindergarten in Iowa City and Coralville. With energy, enthusiasm, and goodwill, she's guided and encouraged hundreds and hundreds of our young children. A recipient of the Golden Apple Award, Mrs. Cheng believes in the Chinese proverb of you learn as you teach. She remarked, and I quote, "I've taught so many kids, but at the same time, I've learned so much from them and grown myself. I will always remember that," end quote. Margareth Cheng is one of a kind.